for joining us. My name is Jennifer Homendy, and I'm the chairwoman of the National Transportation Safety Board. The National Transportation Safety Board is an independent federal agency that's charged by Congress with investigating every civil aviation and serious accident and serious incident in the United States and significant events in other modes of transportation. I want to start by expressing our deepest condolences, our sympathies on behalf of the entire board for those who lost loved ones in this terrible tragedy. Our thoughts, our prayers are with you. Entire communities were affected, and we are thinking of you. With me today is Bryce Banning. Bryce is a senior aircraft accident investigator with the National Transportation Safety Board. He's also going to serve as our investigator in charge of this investigation. Also with me today is the entire board. We have Todd Inman, member Todd Inman. Todd is going to serve as the board member on scene, the spokesperson for this investigation. All of the board members will be here. We have Vice Chairman Alvin Brown, member Mike Graham, who lived in Wichita for 20 years, and we also have member Tom Chapman. The NTSB's headquarters is just a mile from here. And so we are all here because this is an all-hands on-deck event. And we're here to assure the American people that we are going to leave no stone unturned in this investigation. We are going to conduct a thorough investigation of this entire tragedy, looking at the facts. Now, with that, I want to level set. When we go to the scene, and we were here last night, we allow the responders to do their important safety mission, which in this case was search and rescue and recovery. We stand back to allow them to do their important safety mission. And so this, for us, is our first full day on scene with our entire crew coming together. We have about nearly 50 people on scene, and in addition to our resources back at headquarters in our labs and throughout the agency. So with that said, we are not going to get into specific facts in this press conference. I want to level set here. We're going to get into our investigative process. As we are able to confirm factual information, we will provide that. I do want to say this is a whole of government effort. I was able to brief, along with others, the President of the United States and the Vice President this afternoon. I want to thank them for their leadership, for their tremendous support of the NTSB, for our investigators, and for the responders that are on scene doing an important mission. I also want to thank Secretary Sean Duffy, who I was communicating with early on after we first got word of this tragedy. We've been working together throughout the day, along with his team at the DOT and within FAA. I also want to thank Secretary Pete Hegseth, who was also integral in working with us today. Chris Rocheleau, the acting administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. We've heard from many members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, and so I will say this is a tremendous, one more time, whole of government effort. I also want to take a moment and thank the many, many responders that have been on scene. It has been an incredible effort, and I will have a full list that I will provide, that we will provide tomorrow, but I do want to thank them for all their work. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Member Inman for additional remarks.
So today is our first full day on scene. Our investigative team will be on scene as long as it takes in order to obtain all the perishable evidence and all the fact-finding that is needed to bring us to a conclusion of probable cause. Our mission is to understand not just what happened, but why it happened, and to recommend changes to prevent it from happening again. Since we're just beginning our investigation, we don't have a great deal of information to share right now. We will keep you informed by giving regular updates as we learn more. Our intention is to have a preliminary report within 30 days, and the final report will be issued once we've completed all of our fact-finding and investigation. Now, we will not be determining the probable cause of the accident while we are here on scene, nor will we speculate about what may have caused this accident. Today, we will be going and having an organizational meeting and establishing our parties to our investigation. We currently have the following parties that are already identified: PSA Airlines, GE Aerospace, Sikorsky, FAA, NACTA, which represents the air traffic controllers, ALPA, which represents the pilots, Army, AFA, which represents the flight attendants. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada will be an accredited representative under Annex 13 of ICAO. They will be supplemented by MHIRG as a technical advisor. They were previously known as Bombardier. The NTSB offers this party status to those companies, government agencies, and associations that have employees, activities, or equipment involved in the accident. We offer that because they will provide technical expertise and relevant information supporting the development of the best possible factual record. Once they join this investigation, they are not permitted to release documents or talk publicly about the investigation without the consent of the NTSB. So I want to stress this: it is only the NTSB that will provide information related to this investigation, with one exception. Regarding the fatalities that occurred, that notification will be handled by the DC medical examiner. We will not be discussing fatalities or names. That will be handled by them as the proper authority. So we want to talk a little bit about our process. We will analyze the facts and determine the probable cause of the accident, and then issue a report of those determinations. I also want to talk a little bit about some additional people that are here with us, and they're very important to us, and that is our family assistance group. Later today, we will be briefing the families. We normally try to do this before a media event, but in this case, they're still arriving. Our family assistance specialists are already working closely with local officials and others to help assist them in their efforts to support everyone that's affected by this accident. And let me just reiterate what the chair said. A loss of life in an aviation accident is very unusual in the United States, and our heartfelt sorrow goes out to everyone that's affected. It affects us, it affects everyone around us. There are a lot of people hurting today. We will help find out what happened. We will do it factually, and we will do it accurately. As part of this, we're going to be standing up some specific working groups. Those working groups will be operations. They will be looking at the history of the accident flight and crew members' duties for as many days before the crash as appears relevant. We'll be forming a structures group, which will be the documentation of the airframe wreckage and the accident scene, including calculation of impact angles to help determine the plane's pre-impact course and altitude. We'll have a power plants group. They will do the examination of the engines and the engine accessories. We'll have a systems group. They will study the components of the plane's hydraulic, electrical, pneumatic, and associated systems, together with the instruments and elements of the flight control system. We'll have an air traffic control group. They will do reconstruction and review of air traffic control systems provided to and including acquisition of pertinent flight track surveillance information, what you might typically think of as radar or ADSB, along with controller pilot communications. We will also have a survival factors group. They will be doing the documentation of impact, forces and injuries, community emergency planning, and all crash and fire rescue efforts. Also, due to the unique nature of this crash, we will be having a helicopter group as well. Lastly, we will have a human performance group, and this will not be its own group. It will actually be a part of the operations, air traffic control, and helicopter groups. They will study the crew performance and all before the accident factors that might be involved in human error, including fatigue, medication, medical histories, training, workload, equipment design, and work environment. Now we're going to take a few questions, but I will again stress, we don't have a lot of information now. We will continue to gather that. We will try to release it as we can, but we will only talk about the facts of the case that we know right now. So I'm going to ask, we're calling a few people. I'm going to ask that you state your name and affiliation.
James Matthews from Sky News. So we've heard from President Trump today talking about DEI hiring policies within the FAA and associating that with the cause of this accident. What do you say to that?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't hear the remarks. I was briefing House and Senate members. But I believe, Chair, would you like to take that?
As part of any investigation, we look at the human, the machine, and the environment. So we will look at all the humans that were involved in this accident. Again, we will look at the aircraft, we will look at the helicopter, we will look at the environment in which they were operating in. That is standard in any part of our investigation. I'll turn it back.
Chair, can I ask you, has the flight data recorder been recovered yet? And what is the difficulty in a water disaster like this, which presents a very difficult environment for your investigators and the people out of the water?
Well, the question was on the flight data recorders. And we have not recovered the flight data recorders yet. We know they're there. They are underwater. This is not unusual for the NTSB. We have many times recovered flight data recorders in water. We have our lab right here that is about a mile from the NTSB, so it's not unusual. And once we get those, we'll be able to get those read and information from them to be able to provide further information to you. I'm going to turn it back over to Member Inman.
Brother Henry with CBS News. Earlier today, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said a mistake was made last night. Based off of you all's initial investigations and preliminary findings, have you all been able to tell whether this was human error or mechanical failure?
The question was, has there been human error or mechanical failure? We don't know what we know just yet. We do not know enough facts to be able to rule in or out human factor, mechanical factors. That is part of the NTSB investigative process, and where all of these groups will come together. It's one of the reasons why the NTSB is known as the gold standard. We will take the time that's necessary, but I'd also like to reiterate, if we find something that is a significant issue that warrants immediate action, we will not hesitate to make those recommendations and make them public. We have a good track record on that, and we want to continue doing so. Sir?
Well, Sir Tom Costello with NBC News. Does it hurt your investigative process, maybe for the chairman, does it hurt your investigative process to have the president already suggesting possible causes here as you try to keep an open mind and begin this investigation?
Tom, with all due respect, I think the press also likes to state what probable cause is before we get to the probable cause. So what I'm going to say is you need to give us time. You need to give NTSB, it's not that we don't have information. We do have information. We have data. We have substantial amounts of information. We need to verify information. We need to take our time to make sure it is accurate. That's best for you. That's important for the families. It's important for legislators who are seeking answers to try to figure out what they're going to do about this. And so it will take time. We do have a lot of information, but we need some time to verify that.
Yeah, Member Chase Williams of Fox Business. I'm wondering about the conditions in the tower last night. Were there any performance issues in the past with any of these controllers, anything of that?
The question is about controllers. As I said, we're just now forming the groups. The controllers do have union representation, which they're entitled to. They'll be working with our party system and our party groups. They'll be conducting interviews. Those interviews will need to be analyzed, transcribed, and other team members will need to look over it. It will be a long process, but we will go through the entire history.
My question is for the chairwoman. Can you tell us more about what the president and vice president's responses were when the briefing was on today?
Sure. So the question was about my briefing for the president and the vice president. As is standard, we offer briefings on our process and what we know, and this was a briefing with the president and vice president and with Secretary Duffy and Secretary Hegseth and also the acting administrator of the FAA. There was discussion on what we know so far and our process, and that was about it.
Madam Chairwoman, Stephanie Ramos with ABC News. Similar to Tom Costello's question, the president has stated what may have caused the crash, stating common sense. Does that affect your progress at all at this early stage?
Yeah, so the NTSB, we conduct an important safety mission where we take a very careful approach. I'm sorry, the question was on speculating during investigations, which is we often hear about. What I will say is we look at facts on our investigation, and that will take some time. And at some point, we'll be able to provide that factual information, as Member Inman said, and provide that hopefully tomorrow.
Member Inman?
Hang on a second.
Dave Shepardson from Reuters. Have you been able to retrieve the black boxes from the helicopter? Has the military decided whether they're going to read those to the NTSB? And what about the ATC tapes? Have you guys been done?
So the question was about black boxes, which are referred to as black boxes, which are typically orange. We have not recovered any of the boxes involved yet. We feel comfortable and confident that we will be able to. Right now, recovery of life is probably the most important in those that were involved. I mean, there are still ongoing recovery efforts involving the fatalities involved, along with some debris is coming out as well. We will make sure that that perishable evidence is maintained. We have a great process for that. We will probably have more than one black box, so to speak. It's our understanding that the Sikorsky helicopter is equipped with some form of recording devices, and those will be read either by the DoD or by us. We have a good starting relationship with them, and we've already made agreements in order to be able to do that. So I feel comfortable in what we're going to be doing. The other question was about air traffic control. We received a very large package of information from the FAA at about 3 a.m., I believe, this morning. That is still being reviewed and analyzed. I would say there's a lot more information that usually comes in that than what you might find online and people might speculate about. And that is part of that overall process where we take the time to get the information correct and to make sure all the parties are engaged and involved and can fact check that information.
Sir,
One.
Dave Cohen from CNN. Can you tell me if the NTSB has reviewed this FAA internal report that has been cited by the New York Times indicating that the controller that was on duty at the time of the crash was doing a job that's usually done by two people?
We have not reviewed any specific reports about the controllers at this time, at least from the leadership team. Our investigators are continuing to pull all that information. Their personnel records, their files, where they were at, whether they were fatigued, all that information will be part of that investigative process. But right now, we can't speculate on anything that may have been reported in the media until we get the opportunity to validate and understand how it impacts the investigation. We're going to take just a few more questions. Sir?
Yes, Orange Khan, Beaver Magazine. What's the process and the logistics like of bringing the families in? Are they coming into the airport? And how are you going to sort of do the sensitivity of bringing them to the place where this tragedy happened?
So the question is about the families. And many of those families are still en route. Some are still being notified from both the military and from the commercial crash. There is a family assistance facility that's being stood up by American and PSA Airlines in Bethesda, Maryland. They've already been working on that, standing it up. Our team from our disaster assistance team has also been coordinating with them. We plan on briefing them. It is customary that at some point, if the families wish to go to part of the accident site, that we would arrange such a thing, but it will only be when we know that it's safe, we have the correct perishable evidence, and we can do it in the proper modesty that should be for those family members. It will be a little bit of a process, but it will take some time.
Sir, to follow up on the air traffic control system.
Now, sir, are you?
I know that Mary Ellen Farber with DC News now. We heard from some witnesses that they saw people able to come down the slides of the plane. Has there been any indication that people made it off the plane for the other?
Well, again, we will not speak to the fatalities. The DC medical examiner will, but I think the DC fire chief this morning very succinctly said correctly that we believe there are no survivors.
What's their off the plane? Like, did they even get out of the plane?
Last question.
Sir, Victoria Sanchez with
So, hang on one second. Right now, we're going through the debris fields. Nothing we've seen would indicate that maybe slides or chutes were deployed. It was a very quick, rapid impact, but we've seen nothing in that regard so far from the evidence we had, but we still need to verify all of that information. One more question?
Victoria Sanchez, ABC 7. Thank you. Sure. Are you going to be looking at the family member's cell phone?
Go ahead.
Jeff Cook, ABC News. What do you know about the altitude of the helicopter at the moment of impact? And can you talk about what the procedure for such helicopters in that area?
The question was about the helicopter procedures. And in DC, it's kind of a unique environment. We've been getting briefed more and more by the FAA. I'm not an air traffic control specialist, but they're actually helicopter zones, if you will, or tracks. And this one was transiting, I believe, from track 1 to 4 as part of their normal procedure. If you live in DC, you see a lot of helicopters going down into this area. So there's a very well-defined system in that regard. As far as altitude, until we get the additional information, we can't validate or basically corroborate any of that until we get more of the electronic data and the data that's on the plane. I do want to clarify one question that also came about cell phones. You know, in today's age and time, a lot of electronics and other devices do contain a lot of different information. We've found on a number of our accidents that we actually are notified through a smartphone that made sense of that. As part of our process, we will obviously treat all of the effects of the deceased with dignity. We are already starting to pull that information together. If we feel that it's necessary to find or pull some of that information, we will work with the families and make sure we do it in a manner that's respectful for them and their privacy. But right now, we don't have any plans specifically on that amount, on that area until we need to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Some interesting questions asked there towards the end of the press conference. Let's bring back up this NBC4 chopper flight. This is a live chopper flight from the crash site. And I believe this is still live. Is that moving? It is moving. Okay.
Yes,
it was
it
just
is.
still there for a second. And let me explain, folks. The chopper cannot get that much closer to the crash site because it is restricted airspace. With this happening in close proximity to Reagan National Airport and really on the approach to the runway, it's difficult to get any closer than this from a helicopter or news chopper perspective. Garrett Phillips, stream producer, JB here with you live in the Stream Center. So let's break down some of what we have learned. I really do appreciate the altitude question that was asked. But just like we prefaced at the beginning of the live stream, we did not anticipate, at least Garrett and I, did not anticipate a lot of information coming out of this press conference. It was very regulatory, very much based on procedure and basically setting the stage for how the NTSB is going to be conducting their investigation. Garrett, let's start with you. Interesting notes that you grasped from the presser, and then I'll share my own.
Well, I think the most interesting thing actually came from one of the questions, which was asking about a New York Times report regarding the preliminary FAA report that they apparently got their hands on. And it said that staffing at the airport tower where air traffic control was there at Reagan National Airport was not normal, quote unquote, that the air traffic controller who was handling the situation was basically doing a job meant for two people by themselves. And I've got the story pulled up here. It says essentially that the tower has been understaffed since Pretty much a while here at this point. As of September of 2023, they only had, which is the most recent report that they have as far as the workforce plan, they only had 19 fully certified controllers when regulation or recommendations by the FAA call for 30. So they were 11 people short. Somebody was doing this job here, and from what I can tell, reading this report, they were handling both air traffic for planes as well as helicopters, which is normally you would have one person dedicated for the helicopters, one person dedicated for the planes, because they speak over different frequencies. So you're having to kind of basically go back and forth between multiple devices. It's like if I had to speak into this microphone just to talk to the pilots for the airplanes, and then I have to go to another side of the table and talk into a different microphone for the helicopter pilots. So obviously having two people there to be able to easily communicate between themselves and those pilots, I don't know if that necessarily would have, changed anything here, but it is interesting that the initial FAA report suggests that they were essentially understaffed.
That's obviously an interesting report from the New York Times. As we noted, though, earlier, air traffic control is going to be a support system. And look, and air traffic control obviously is going to guide all the aircraft in the area in the direction and basically at the helping govern the altitude and, helping all the aircraft in the area head in the direction they need to be heading in. It's basically steering a whole lot of moving parts in that airspace. However, it's a support system, and as we noted with Jim earlier from USF, our expert on our previous live stream, line of sight is obviously going to be the number one thing that helps prevent a crash like this, is being able to see the aircraft. Now, I know it's at night, I know it's dark out there, but it's at an altitude where there's still enough light coming from the ground. Now, what Jim was noting is that you'd be surprised at how easy it is to confuse an aircraft light with a light from below. That I thought that was actually really interesting. I would have thought that that the light from an airplane on approach, getting ready to land, is going to be very unique in comparison to, let's say, the lights on a skyscraper or something else in comparison to that. But he made it clear that those lights can be confused at that altitude.
Talking about flying at night, talking about basically especially because of how densely packed this area can be in terms of, just the crowd, you have on the horizon basically just stretching out. I don't know if you've ever looked out the window, when a plane is landing.
Who doesn't?
You can see kind of just a stretch of lights, just kind of stretching out there. And there are other planes sometimes, or other aircrafts that are below you or above you, that you might get confused if you just looked into the landscape.
I'm glad you bring that up, because that's where the altitude comes in. Because if the chopper is flying at an altitude above the plane, I don't know how
think
much. But let's say if the chopper is flying above the American Airlines flight before the crash occurs, line of sight would make it more difficult to see the plane's light and to see the aircraft with line of sight, rather than the opposite. If the chopper is below and you're looking up and you see the plane, that's very much, it's easily identifiable as a plane. But that's why the altitude in the moment before the crash is going to be obviously. That's why I appreciate the question coming in from the reporter asking. Look, we're not going to get too many specifics, but at least asking the question about the altitude. Look, that's going to be a key factor in the crash. I mean, even you had the president of the United States hours ago talking about how altitude is going to be a significant factor in what the NTSB finds out. I'm sorry, so I cut you off. Continue.
No. I mean, you're right. Can we pull up the video? Do we have the video again?
Do. Yep. So this is the video from EarthCam of the moment that the crash occurred. There you can see the plane in the center, the big light in the center, and then there it is. It's hard to tell, and with the.
I also wondered too.
I can't. You can't determine altitude-wise with the moments closing in between the collision whether or not one is higher than the other. I think that would be reckless and irresponsible.
Can we also pull up? Do you still have the flight paths?
Yes.
So I also wondered too if it was a situation of because we've been thinking of it, just to give it a perspective, maybe in terms of like a car crash. We've been thinking of it like either head on or like even a T-bone type of situation. It's possible to me that maybe the two of them were just moving in a direction where if you're looking forward, you don't always see, who's moving on your left situation.
Right, but you would imagine these pilots are going to have
It would be trained better for that,
very
sure.
wide field of view and be able to see to the left and to the right. I understand what you're saying. Right. Let's just kind of show the wide angle. Or not the wide angle, but the wider view of the flight-aware data. We got this from the Associated Press that shows the tracking data for each respective aircraft, the gold line being the Black Hawk helicopter and the purple line being the American Airlines flight on approach. Now, from everything that we have heard thus far in various interviews and just on basically digesting this story, is that the flight patterns that you see here are relatively standard. That the flight pattern that you see with the chopper heading south down the Potomac and then curving around the Reagan National Airspace and then progressing south. Also the purple line of the American Airlines flight getting ready to land. This is all very standard, but some have pointed out, and we'll see if I can zoom back in. There it is. There is. We called them zigzagging earlier. Let's just stay with our very non-aviation-based lingo because we're not aviators. But you can see the gold line in the center of your screen. You can see how there's a pivot to the southwest by the chopper in the final moments. Now,
when we were talking to Jim earlier, he did mention that flying one of these types of exercises, very likely it's given a directive to the pilot to stay over the Potomac. So he had mentioned previously that the reason why you might have seen that diversion is because they were about to cross over land, and so they tried to correct. And now, whether that is something that was planned, whether that was something that was maybe a last-minute situation, we don't really know, and we're not going to know until the NTSB report comes out.
So if they were staying above the water, that's fine. And pivoting to the southwest and turning. However, the altitude is again the factor we keep coming back to. If you weren't on our previous live stream, I mean, these two lines can intersect if the altitude is separated by a couple thousand feet, and then there really isn't a problem. And obviously, the more separation that you have, the better. You don't want two aircraft flying right on top of each other. You want there to be some separation. The only reason I know is because I paid enough attention to pilots when I was, flying 3 times a week as a previous station in my news career. I was in a chopper 2 to 3 times a week, usually 3 times a week. And I found it to be fascinating to listen to the pilots talk to air traffic control and navigate around the complex airspaces that they would have to navigate. And so I remember just thinking, my goodness, there's just so much to air traffic that I and most others have no clue about. This is a very special field, and controllers have to be highly specialized and trained. And it's also, too, you heard President Trump talk earlier about the psychology of it all, and I think what he was referencing is the mental fatigue that comes with being an air traffic controller. It is, it's not a job that really, you don't want to have a mental lapse while you are doing air traffic control. You have people's lives at stake. It's a job where you really do have to be focused, and having ample staff is, of course, going to be extremely important. So that's why the New York Times report, which we have not independently verified, that's the New York Times report, it's very interesting, because if there were staffing challenges and if there was one person doing the job of multiple, then could that have contributed? Look, don't want to get too speculative. Obviously, when it comes to the exact nature of the crash itself, we're here looking at some of the variables at play that we know have come to light thus far. But to suggest that anything is rooted in fact right now, it's just trying to use the expert analysis that we have to piece together some of the puzzle pieces that we have. But if you were dumping out a puzzle onto your dining room table, and it's a 1,000-piece puzzle. We have a quarter of that tops right now. We have a lot of data is being presented thus far. We have flight data, but like the location data that you're looking at here on your screen. We've heard about the recordings. They haven't even recorded let's talk about that. The flight data recorders have not yet been recovered. And I don't think that's all that surprising, to tell you the truth. This has been really a recovery operation. They have to get...
They're worried way more about the...
67 bodies.
The bodies that are in the water.
That they have to recover. And so at some point in the probably not too distant future, they'll get into the water to retrieve not the black boxes, but the orange boxes, basically all the instruments that are designed to collect data, and not just collect data, Garrett. But what's interesting is that flight data recorders are designed to preserve data so that if it's in a fiery crash
or in the bottom of a icy river, right?
Bottom of an icy section of the ocean. I mean, submerged hundreds of feet, if not thousands of feet down. I'd be very curious to know about the process when it comes to designing a flight recorder, because it has to
survive
be able
a lot,
endure the harshest of elements, right? So
it should be also noted, before we get too far away from it, we were talking about the mental
fatigue of an air traffic controller.
Traffic controllers. FAA and the NATCA, which is the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, they did announce back in July of last year that there was an agreement to provide more rest between shifts because fatigue was an issue that was being reported on and investigated by the FAA at the time. So it's not even that we think of that as like, oh, that's last year. That's less than a year ago. And it's not like they, as we know, how quickly does something happen, right? These types of situations, when agreements are met to, it takes a year or two before they're really fully implemented. Not to suggest that was something that happened here, but clearly there was an issue with air traffic control and the workload that they've been dealing with. And it's one that they are going to have to continue to address.
All right, let's start to take some of the questions that have been coming in. Questions, even if you just want to voice support for the families of these victims, and you heard one of the final questions asked about, family members arriving and under the, once they can basically secure the scene, they'll be able to take family members out to the crash site if they want to pay their respects to their loved one. But right now, it's about obviously the victims, their bodies being recovered, returned to the families. This is a nightmarish, heartbreaking day for those families, and getting to DC right now is, of course, going to be the utmost importance for many of those families as they find a way to grieve and heal in time. So you can use hashtag HeyJB. You can use hashtag HeyGarrett. And what we will do is pluck some of the questions and comments out of the comment section and take them live. So Missy Elliott, hey JB, hey Garrett, we heard the recording between the helicopter and ATF. Have they released or talked about what the ATC, air traffic control, and pilots of the airplane might have said before this incident? I haven't seen anything. Have you?
There was a report, I'll have to find it here again, from the AP about some very final transmissions between air traffic control and the Black Hawk helicopter specifically. I'll see if I can find the comments specifically, but I saw that earlier today. Other than that, we have not really, we know that there was a fairly last minute diversion. The plane was not originally going to land in the runway that it ended up making its approach in. But that was made far enough, I think, in advance, based on the reporting I've seen, that probably is not really the main culprit here. Let me see if I can find the information here that I'm looking for.
In the meantime, folks, we are looking for your comments with hashtag HeyJB or Hey Garrett, excuse me. Wow, no, Team Brittany pointing this out. Sadly, there are already fake ATC recordings circulating online. I would like to warn others to confirm all info before posting it randomly. prayers for all victims, families, and friends. Yeah, no, that it does not get more. That is the worst type of internet behavior. Obviously, somebody doing it for clicks or attention or whatever it may be, but also be careful with AI.
Right.
Fake recordings are one thing. Also, there might just be stuff circulating on various social media platforms that are just incorrect, where somebody is told that this is the real one because they think it's the real one, and maybe even the original poster believes it to be a real air traffic recording from the moments before the actual collision, but they're just misguided and they don't know that it's really not the actual moments from that airspace or from that night. And so mistakenly they share it. Just be careful, folks, when it comes to what's being circulated online.
As we talked about with the previous comment, the AP report said that a few minutes before landing, the air traffic controllers asked the arriving commercial jets, the American Airlines plane, to land on a shorter runway 33 at Reagan National. And the pilot said that they would be able to do so, which is why you saw there was a change there. After controllers cleared the plane to land on the runway and the plane began to make that approach, about 30 seconds before the crash, an air traffic controller reportedly asked the helicopter if it had the arriving plane in sight, if it could see the plane. Mm-hmm. And then just moments before the crash, the controller made another radio call to the helicopter saying, PAT-25, which is the helicopter, pass behind the CRJ, pass behind the American Airlines flight. And then seconds later, the two aircrafts hit. Between the 30 seconds roughly to the moment of impact when those two air traffic control calls were made, the radio calls were made, the helicopter reportedly never responded, never answered either of those radio calls.
So let's see. Oh, yeah. So to Gallery's question, how deep is the river? At the crash site, it's waist deep. So I would imagine it's, 3 feet? Somewhere in that range.
Yeah,
I mean,
probably somewhere.
That's
there.
Why you can see from this live chopper feed here that sections of the plane are still visible above the surface of the water. Let's see here. What else? Someone saying that the entire radar and ATC audio for multiple minutes is available on a channel that I'm not familiar with, so I'll have to check that out. Let's see. William, why would the pilot appear to have flown straight at the plane, which should have been visible in clear conditions? Yeah, they've made it very clear that the conditions last night were very clear. That's one of the. I mean, William, that's perhaps the key question, because if you look at it in the video, we'll show this video here again. I mean, look, we can't determine whether or not it's what is going on in these final moments. It might appear to be quite linear here from what we see, but we just don't know. Now, I don't want to get too heavy into theories, but someone opined earlier that perhaps this came down to, could this have been a medical emergency inside the helicopter? Now, I would obviously hope not, but everything's on the table, right? There are a few theories that I have seen thus far that you could say definitively that you can rule out, because there's just so little that we know at this time. So, Missy says, hey, like, here's let's actually address this. Like, from Missy, hey JB, hey Garrett. There's speculation. Thank you for at least being clear there. There's speculation that the chopper pilot was mistakenly looking at another plane. How does a helicopter pilot identify which plane the ATF is talking about? They usually, this is a great question for Jim from earlier, but usually they'll give a heading of some kind, right? They'll give, they'll be very descriptive, and I forget the exact aviation terminology, but they will give a descriptive
direction to look
to look at, and also too whether or not you're looking up or down, because a lot of times when air traffic control is communicating with a pilot, it's because the pilot in all likelihood maybe can't see the aircraft in question, and so they'll have to actually give exactly where to look: up, down, left, right, basically keeping your head on a swivel. That's something you hear a lot with pilots. You're keeping your head on a swivel at all times, and keeping and looking all around, up, down, left, right, and constantly scanning the sky for aircraft in your vicinity. Yeah, so I I just see a lot of different theories, and really where exactly the chopper pilot was looking at the time, that might not be something that we ever know. I'm not entirely certain if there's any technology or any audible recording that is going to give us insight as to exactly where the pilot's sightline was in the moments before the crash. I mean, were they looking in the wrong spot? Is it a situation where they were looking for the plane, thought that they saw the plane, they were looking at the wrong plane? I'm sure that that's entirely plausible, but if it has to do with a line of sight issue and the chopper pilot looking one way and instead of looking the other and mistakenly looking at the wrong light source, then I would imagine that there's a chance that they never determine that is the actual. They could theorize. I'm sure the NTSB could theorize and say, we believe this is the cause of the crash, but this is going to be a 1 to 2 year process. Now, will there be various reports that come out, leaks, as you would, sources speaking from the NTSB and releasing information, as they find out more? Will a national sort of news source like a network news, or let's say the New York Times that we mentioned earlier, would they have sources within the NTSB to provide some of the information that is coming out as the investigation is ongoing? It's absolutely possible, and it's happened in the past. Will it happen this time around? Given the magnitude of this investigation, given how many people have died, given how much attention the crash has received, how high profile it is being in our nation's capital, not to mention 10 days after President Trump was sworn into office and making changes from a leadership perspective in a lot of different sectors of government. There's going to be just a tremendous amount of attention on this investigation, and you would expect that it's going to be locked down when it comes to leaks, the potential for leaks and information getting out from inside the investigation process. But it's happened in the past, could happen again, and it might be weeks from now, and you might just see a report, and that gives us some insight. But it's going to take many, many days for a lot of the initial evidence to be uncovered. Garrett, I'm actually, one of the questions I'd be curious to find out the answer to, given that the press conference was never going to reveal much, one of the questions I would have perhaps asked in the room is, how long is it going to take? What's the ballpark figure as to how long it's going to take to just do evidence gathering? I mean, just to collect all the evidence. Is that a month?
They said that they are, during the press conference, they said that the first preliminary report was expected in 30 days.
30 days.
So about a month.
That they have
whether that means that they have gathered all of the evidence that they're going to gather and now they have to start combing through it, or if that's just a small fraction of the process of gathering all of the evidence they need, we don't really know. Only that the first preliminary report we can expect sometime at the end of February.
Yep. So, see what that report entails, and it could have a lot of information in it. It could have very little information in it. Folks, that's going to do it for our live stream here with stream producer Garrett Phillips and myself, JB Biunno. Thank you for joining us. I believe this is a live picture that we'll leave you with here from Reagan National Airport, showing that that things are, again, we noted earlier, I don't think that it's going to be normal, quote unquote, for some time, but that aircraft operations have resumed in our nation's capital. Not sure what we are looking at there, which runway, but there you can see the air traffic control tower to the left. I believe that very well might be the runway where the American Airlines flight was landing. It's hard to tell from our vantage point and from the distance that we're at. But folks, we really appreciate you joining us here from the Stream Center. We'll have additional details and information on WFLA.com as we find out more details about this story. I'd like to thank stream producer Garrett Phillips. I'm JB Biunno for everybody commenting along and a lot of folks passing along thoughts and prayers in the comment section. That's always good to see as far as people sharing good energy from our comment section. We appreciate all the folks that have been tuning in and just trying to get some more information on this tragic story. WFLA.com is your home base for all updates on this story and Florida's top news. We'll be back with any additional updates as needed. For Garrett Phillips and JB Biunno, thanks for joining us. Be safe out there, folks.